Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. So this video is going to show you a series of examples of paintings that work with either a limited palette, using value as a primary mode of capturing space, form, and light. First, we'll take a look at a few traditional Chinese landscapes. Chinese landscapes really paved the way for painting as we know it. These ink paintings are an early example of the impact a painting can have when stripped down to value composition and mark-making. This painting, created by artist Jia Zhui from the Song Dynasty, please excuse my pronunciation, was created between the years 1190 and 1230. This is such an old painting, and it's such an incredible example of how these Chinese landscape painters would use scale in order to capture the grandeur of landscapes. Notice how small the figures are in the bottom center of the composition, and how that relationship between the figures and their landscape and the space around them creates emphasis on the grandeur of the space, on how vast and giant the space is, but also the human experience within it. In this work, artist Huang Gongwang uses just one color of ink to capture a sense of light and space. Notice how the artist describes the form of the mountains using undulating lines, as well as larger sections of shape. They create atmospheric perspective by using the lightest wash for the furthest away mountains. Because the ink and the value becomes heightened in contrast and value as they get closer to the viewer, the sense of space becomes that much more effective. Here are some painting studies from Italian artist Palma Giovanni. Italian masters would often create value studies before beginning a painting. This is because light is one of the most important things that can make or break a representational painting. Light, shadow, shape, and line are all used here in order to articulate form while thinking about the most important, most general aspects of the subject. Before going in to paint major shapes, the artist first mapped out the general composition using a piece of charcoal. Mapping out the most general aspects of the composition first will ensure that when you go through details later on, you won't put them in the wrong place. In these studies by Leonardo da Vinci used gesture drawing, or capturing the energy and movement in the subject first, before elaborating on the form. This is an excellent way to begin a work of art. Notice how Da Vinci uses cross contour in order to create movement and volume around the form of the horse. Notice how his lines look like they physically wrap around the form of the horse. This is a technique that you can use with a paintbrush in order to capture the volume of a form. Here's another example of cross-contour drawing and painting. This is an example by master printmaker Albrecht Dürer. Next, I want to show you a few paintings in full color that I've changed to black and white in order to show you how value is functioning in the paintings. Notice how important value, or the range between dark and light, is to capturing light, form, and space in this work by Diego Velázquez. There's a rich story behind this painting. I highly recommend looking further into it if you're interested. Notice how the light is coming in from the right side of the painting. In both the black and white and color depictions of the painting, you get a full sense of how light and shadow are reacting with each other in this space. The artist, Velázquez, is shown creating this massive painting and breaking the fourth wall by gazing back at the viewer. In this painting by Frida Kahlo, titled Lo que el agua me dio, or What the Water Gave Me, Kahlo uses color and value in interesting ways. Look at the yellow and red dress in the bottom left corner. Notice how, in the black and white version, there's almost no distinction between the value of the yellow and the white. This is because those two colors were actually in pretty much the same value in the painting. Because of their difference in hue, they become distinct in the color version. Also notice the general shift in value between the water and the white bathtub. These relationships are the most important things to figure out when beginning a painting. Here's a more graphic example by comic book artist Tomer Hanuka. Notice how successful his use of value is through color. He's chosen those specific tones based on the specific color relationships he was going for, but also based on the value that he needed in order to capture that dramatic sense of light in that interior scene. I also want to mention how light and value can function in film. This is a still image from Miyazaki's Howl's Moving Castle. While Miyazaki has an incredible sense of color in his films, even when you eliminate the saturation of his colors, each and every form can still stand for itself. Notice how the smoke coming out of the castle still looks like it's a separate material in front of the landscape behind it, because of how he layered space and value. Next, I want to show you paintings with an excellent use of chromatic black and neutral tones to capture light and space. Check out this Rembrandt painting, this beautiful nocturnal scene in which yellow light in combination with deep purple chromatic blacks create the most beautiful complementary relationship. Notice how many different kinds of black and neutral tones make up this composition. Also notice just how vibrant that yellow feels because of how many neutral tones are surrounding it in the composition. And it's not just that they're neutral tones around the yellow, but they're complementary neutral tones that are incredibly complex and chosen specifically to make that really saturated tone in the focal point feel even more vibrant. In this painting by Vincent van Gogh, there's classic Van Gogh paint application in thick, fresh layering of marks. There's also an incredible balance between warm and cool neutrals. All tones and values make sense because of the overall context within this painting. Similar to the Rembrandt we just looked at, the warm yellows and cool purples are working together hand in hand to create an incredibly complex sense of temperature in the painting as well as value. If painting monochromatically is feeling a little boring to you, I recommend playing with temperature. How can you create a slightly warm and slightly cooler version of that tone that makes up your composition? And use them hand in hand based on where you see warmth and coolness in the space or object that you're painting. I thought it was worth looking at a few of Picasso's Blue Period pieces, because they show the capacity for emotion and drama using just one tone. Sometimes a deep blue can function beautifully as the darkest tone in your work. We can't talk about light without talking about Henry Osawa Tanner's work. He was an incredible black painter who was a master of color and light. These domestic scenes capture beautiful, quiet moments. Notice in the painting on the left, it looks as if the light may be coming from a fireplace on the left-hand side of the painting, while there's an open window to the right. Notice how Tanner creates a hierarchy of values. In the back section of the painting, everything is probably between values 1 and 4 on the value scales you created. This is because light is shining in brightly from a window. Even the darkest shadows in that very lit up section of the painting are still a pretty light mid-tone. In the other sections of the painting, we have a very full range of values because of the specific lighting situation. This is also used as a way of placing emphasis on the subjects. The way he uses light captures this quiet and tender moment with naturalism and a sense of specificity. Henry Osawa Tanner's work feels like it's in conversation with Andrew Wyeth's. Andrew Wyeth painted mostly with tempera watercolor and subtle neutral tones. Like Tanner, he paints quiet moments with an emphasis on detail and a very muted palette. Notice how Wyeth uses the placement of different valued tones in order to create this beautiful sense of deep space. I'm just in awe of this curtain and the transparency he achieved. One thing I find really compelling about this piece is that the subject of the painting is the wind. So the title, Wind from the Sea, and the fact that it almost appears like the wind itself is the central figure creating this movement through the piece is just such an incredible idea. He's depicting something that's invisible through thoughtful and personal imagery. To show you a few of Andrew Wyeth's studies that he would create in order to plan for a finished painting. Between this study for the painting Army Surplus and the actual painting, a lot has changed. In this study, Wyeth practiced with the most general aspects of the composition. When you're in a planning stage, I recommend thinking only about the biggest shapes of value and how they'll activate the composition. I assume there were some more studies created in between this study on the left and the final painting on the right, because he changed quite a bit. While he's depicting the same model, and in pretty much the same pose, his perspective has changed quite a lot. This model is one of Wyeth's friends named Willard Snowden. This next set of study and finished painting gives you a more straightforward idea of how he went from a study into a finished work. Deciding how light and value would function were instrumental in him starting a painting and knowing where it was going. This is something that I highly recommend you take into consideration whenever you're starting a new painting. This painting is of a friend named James Loper, who lived close by. Andrew Wyeth was the son of N.C. Wyeth, who was a really famous illustrator at the time. I recommend checking out N.C. Wyeth's work, because it could not be more different than the work his son came to make. Next, I want to show you some Japanese woodblock prints in order to show how flat color and value can produce a beautifully complex and stylistic approach to space. And notice how the artist separates foreground from middle ground from background by layering space and layering value. Notice how perspective is created by the descending scale of objects as they go back into the distance. Notice how objects become more and more cut off by the frame because of the point of view created by this work of art. Also notice how successful a very limited palette can be. White and gray actually enhance the way that we view the blues and reds and yellows in the space. Next, I want to show you a work by Picasso that refers back to Las Meninas that we saw earlier in the presentation. Picasso looked at this work by Diego Velázquez and abstracted it using his own style of cubism. Notice the light in this work of art. When we look back at the Picasso, you'll see that light is coming in from the same window and affecting space in really similar ways, despite the vast difference in style. Even if you are an abstract painter, thinking about light, shadow, and value is going to be incredibly important in creating a successful painting. Notice how large the painter is in this depiction. My interpretation of this is that he identified with Velázquez, who was another hotshot painter, and he made this bigger, larger than life. The painter is bigger than every other figure in the space, which to me looks a bit like it's Picasso's ego kind of shining through. Julie Moretu is an American artist originally from Ethiopia who explores urban socio-political issues and changes through abstractions of architectural space. Check out the variety of mark that she uses with just a few tones. Moretu creates an incredible sense of layered form and energy through this detailed way of making marks using line and shape and almost calligraphic ways of using her paintbrush. So if you're ever confused about what sort of marks you should make, look at a Julie Moretu painting. It'll be incredibly helpful. The last works I want to show you are by incredible contemporary painter Mickalene Thomas. Thomas creates incredible paintings of people in her community, often referencing the complexity of Black femininity through her specific experience. She uses many different modes of representation in her work. So when I say a mode of representation, I mean check out how she's using photographs, physical photographs in her work, along with more graphic, almost comic book styles of painting, along with more traditional realism, and even line drawings. Notice the wide variety of different kinds of neutrals, some warm, some cool, activating the entire spectrum from dark to light, and they're all working together to create this beautifully balanced composition that will keep the viewer's eye interested for an incredibly long time. Mickalene Thomas's work is so powerful. I recommend looking into it further. Well, that concludes the presentation. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope you found this inspiring and can pull from some of these artists when you're working on your own paintings. Have a great day. Bye-bye.